Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the incredibly gritty world of Charles Dickens's classic, Oliver Twist. But we aren't just looking at the story as a whole. We're zooming in on the psychological mystery of its absolute most complex character, Nancy. We're going to unpack exactly why a woman steeped in London's criminal underworld ultimately decides to risk literally everything. Now, to really get this, we have to look at how Dickens sets up his universe. Morality here, it's usually painted in strict black and white. On one side, we've got characters who are purely good. Think young Oliver or Rose Maylie. I mean, they can barely even comprehend the concept of evil. And then on the other side, we have villains who are purely undeniably evil, like Fagin, Bill Sikes, and monks. These guys simply cannot fathom goodness. It's a world of absolute extremes. Which brings us to part one of our explainer, the morally complex outlaw. Because as we dig into the text, we find one glaring anomaly. Nancy stands entirely alone. She's the only major character in this whole story who truly comprehends and is capable of both good and evil. She's not a pure innocent, right? But she's certainly not a monster either. And this makes her a truly fascinating psychological study in gray. To figure out why she breaks the mold, we really have to look closely at where she came from. So let's move into part two, product of the streets. The historical backdrop here is absolutely crucial. See, the New Poor Law of 1834 instituted this brutal system. It banded parishes into workhouses and made seeking relief so deliberately undesirable and degrading that many destitute individuals, especially orphans, were driven straight into the criminal underworld just to survive. I mean, imagine a system so cruel that the dirty, dangerous streets of London actually felt like a safer refuge than a state-run institution. It's wild to think about. And that harsh truth brings us to Nancy's reality. She is a true child of these streets. Recruited into Fagin's gang as a literal child, Nancy grew up completely immersed in the very vices that Victorian society condemned. Working as a thief and a prostitute with, as Dickens calls it, free and agreeable manners, she has never known anything other than those dirty, dangerous streets and the manipulative control of Fagin. That's her whole world. So, the crucial point to understand is how this toxic environment warps basic human connection. Her devotion to her abusive lover, Bill Sikes, becomes, in the text words, a new means of violence and suffering. It perfectly captures her tragic reality. Even a natural human instinct like love or devotion is twisted by her environment into something that leads to criminal acts, and eventually her own demise. She's completely trapped in this vicious cycle of abuse. Yet, despite all of that, we reach part three, the spark of goodness. Despite her environment, and despite her connection to the brutal Sikes, Nancy actually commits the most noble act in the entire novel by stepping up to protect young Oliver. So you have to ask, why? Why does Nancy ultimately risk her life? Well, when she looks at Oliver, she doesn't just see a boy. It's like a mirror reflecting her own tragic past. He reminds her of her lost innocence and purity before Fagin got his claws into her. She's moved by this profound pity for his suffering because she knows exactly what fate awaits him. Plus, stepping up for Oliver is her way of rebelling against Fagin's corrupting influence. It proves that despite everything she's been through, she retains a basic human need for compassion. Seeing Oliver just triggers this incredibly powerful moral awakening within her. This takes us right to part four, the London Bridge crossroads. This tiny spark of goodness leads Nancy to take a massive, life-threatening risk. She sets up a secret meeting to save the boy, and it takes place on London Bridge with Mr. Brownlow and Rose Maylie. Now, this isn't just a random location. It's a super powerful symbol in the text. Think about it. A bridge connects two places separated by an uncrossable chasm. Here, it represents the brief, fragile collision between the idyllic, moral overworld of Rose and Brownlow and the degraded, dangerous underworld of Nancy. For just a fleeting moment, these two completely different worlds touch. During this meeting on the bridge, Rose and Brownlow are so moved by Nancy's actions that they offer her a chance to flee the country and start a new life. And honestly, this brings us to the pivotal mystery of her character. She's willing to risk everything to save Oliver from the underworld, so why on earth won't she let them save her? Well, she tragically rejects their offer with these deeply poignant words. "I am chained to my old life. I loathe and hate it now, but I cannot leave it." She is utterly convinced that she's irrevocably doomed. The psychological damage of her upbringing is so profound that she genuinely believes she's beyond redemption. She feels she absolutely must return to her abuser, Sikes, out of this twisted sense of belonging and inevitability. It's heartbreaking. Which sets up part 5, The ultimate sacrifice. Her conscious choice to return to Sikes after saving Oliver sets the stage for a devastating climax. The underworld, as you might guess, does not let go easily. Fagin discovers that Nancy has been secretly meeting with Rose and Brownlow, and in an absolute masterclass of malicious manipulation, Fagin incites Sikes. He falsely claims that Nancy planned to drug Sikes with laudanum to betray him. This calculated lie pushes Sikes, a guy already totally prone to brutal violence, into an uncontrollable, blinding fury. What follows is honestly one of the darkest moments in all of literature. Sikes violently murders Nancy, brutally clubbing her to death. And this brilliantly, though horrifyingly, illustrates the reality of her world. The scene is so incredibly powerful and psychologically complex that Charles Dickens himself became obsessed with it. He actually repeatedly performed this murder scene during public readings with such intense passion that women in the audience would literally faint. In fact, many historians and biographers believe the sheer physical and emotional toll of performing this specific scene hastened Dickens's own early death. Yet even in her gruesome final moments, there's a glimmer of light. As Sikes attacks her, Nancy holds up a white handkerchief given to her earlier by Rose Maylie. This handkerchief is a really profound symbol of purity and redemption. By holding it up towards heaven as she dies, Nancy makes a final testament to her preserved soul. She may have lived her entire life in the gutter, but in the very end, her spirit reached for something higher. Which brings us to the core thesis of her character, and the big takeaway from this explainer. Nancy's tragic sacrifice leaves us with this final, lingering thought. Her story proves that even in the absolute darkest, most corrupting of circumstances, a spark of basic human goodness can survive. The human soul, despite all the odds, can remain incorruptible. So, what do you think? Are we entirely the products of our environment, or is there an unshakable core of goodness in us all? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.